Hook. When the HOA slapped him with a hefty fine for hunting on his own property, he didn't just pay up and move on. Instead, he turned the tables in a way they never saw coming. He bought the sprawling acres they loved for their precious hiking trails and shut them down for good, leaving the community stunned and scrambling. He had always been a man who valued his space, his independence, and the quiet rhythm of life on his rural property. His name was Ethan Caldwell, a 42-year-old contractor who'd built a comfortable life for himself and his family on a 15-acre plot just outside a small town in northern Georgia. The land wasn't just a home, it was his sanctuary. He'd grown up hunting deer and turkey with his father, learning the lay of the woods, the patience of the stalk, and the respect for the land that came with it. His property, bordered by dense pine forests and a winding creek, was perfect for it. 4 years, he'd hunted there, always within state regulations, always on his own land. The trouble started when the new housing development went up about a mile away. Pinewood Estates, they called it, a gated community of cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns and a homeowners association that seemed to have a rule for everything. Ethan didn't think much of it at first. His land was far enough away that the development didn't encroach on his daily life. He figured they'd keep to themselves, and he'd keep to his. But then the hikers started showing up. Pinewood Estates had a problem. Their fancy community didn't come with much green space. The developers had cleared most of the trees to cram in as many houses as possible, leaving the residents with little more than a playground and a couple of tennis courts. So, the HOA had taken to promoting a network of unofficial trails that snaked through the undeveloped land adjacent to Ethan's property. It wasn't their land, mind you, just a mix of county-owned parcels and private lots that nobody had bothered to fence off or develop. The HOA's website even had a map, proudly calling it the Pinewood Trail System, as if they had some claim to it. Ethan noticed the first few hikers about a year after the development opened. They'd wander through the woods near his property line, sometimes cutting across his land without so much as a nod. He didn't make a fuss at first. He figured they were just lost or clueless, and he wasn't one for confrontation over small things. But the trickle of hikers became a stream. On weekends, he'd see groups of them, families with kids, retirees with walking sticks, even the occasional jogger, tromping through the woods, leaving behind water bottles, granola bar wrappers, and the occasional dog mess. Ethan's patience started to wear thin. He'd worked hard to keep his land pristine, and now it was being treated like a public park. Worse, the noise and foot traffic were scaring off the deer. Hunting season came around, and Ethan found himself spending more time shooing people off his property than actually hunting. One crisp October morning, Ethan was out early, his rifle slung over his shoulder, tracking a buck he'd seen the day before. He was deep in his own woods, well within his property lines, when he heard voices. A group of hikers, 4 adults and a couple of kids, were cutting through his land, chatting loudly about some HOA meeting. Ethan stepped out from behind a tree, trying to keep things civil. "Hey, folks," he said, keeping his tone even. "You're on private property here. The trail's back that way." He pointed toward the county land. The group stopped, looking confused. One of the men, wearing a bright red windbreaker, frowned. "This is the Pinewood Trail," he said, like that settled it. "We've been walking here for months." Ethan shook his head. "This is my land. You're welcome to use the county trails, but you can't cut through here." The man in the windbreaker didn't take kindly to that. "We're not hurting anything," he snapped. "What's your problem?" "My problem," Ethan said, his voice tightening, "is you're trespassing. And you're scaring off the game." That's when the man noticed Ethan's rifle. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. "You're hunting out here? With kids around? That's dangerous." "I'm hunting on my own property," Ethan said, doing his best to stay calm. "If you weren't here, there'd be no issue." The group left, grumbling, but Ethan figured that was the end of it. He was wrong. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the Pinewood Estates HOA. It was printed on official-looking letterhead, complete with a logo of a pine tree and a mountain that didn't even exist in the area. The letter informed Ethan that he'd been reported for unsafe and disruptive behavior due to his hunting activities. It claimed that his actions posed a significant risk to the community's residents who used the nearby trails. Enclosed was a fine for $1,500, citing a vague HOA bylaw about endangering the welfare of the community. Ethan stared at the letter, dumbfounded. He wasn't even part of their HOA. His property wasn't in Pinewood Estates, and he'd never signed any of their agreements. He called the HOA office, expecting to clear things up quickly. The woman on the phone, who introduced herself as Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, was polite but unyielding. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we understand you're not a member of our association, but your actions affect our residents. The trails are a vital community resource, and your hunting creates an unsafe environment." "Those trails aren't yours," Ethan said. "And I'm hunting on my own land. You've got no jurisdiction over me." "We'll see about that," Karen replied. "The safety of our residents comes first." The next week, Ethan got another letter. This one threatened legal action if he didn't pay the fine and cease hunting on his property. They'd even contacted the county, claiming his hunting violated some obscure zoning regulation. Ethan checked with the county himself and found no such rule. But the HOA's persistence was maddening. They started sending emails, leaving voicemails, even showing up at his gate with notices taped to his mailbox. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about control. They wanted to dictate what he could do on his own land. Ethan wasn't the type to roll over. He'd dealt with pushy clients and shady subcontractors in his business, and he knew how to play hardball. He started digging. First, he hired a surveyor to confirm his property lines, just to make sure there was no dispute about where his land ended and the county's began. The surveyor's report was clear. Ethan's 15 acres were exactly as he'd always known, and the hikers were undeniably crossing his property. Armed with that, he sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop encouraging trespassing on his land. He even put up "no trespassing" signs along his property line, bright orange ones that were impossible to miss. The HOA didn't back down. They responded with another letter, this time accusing Ethan of harassing their residents by posting the signs. They claimed the signs were unsightly and disrupted the aesthetic of the community. Ethan laughed out loud when he read that. His land was a mile from their gated entrance, out of sight from their precious cul-de-sacs. But the absurdity of it only fueled his resolve. That's when Ethan had his idea. It came to him one evening while he was sitting on his porch, sipping a beer and staring out at the woods. The HOA loved their trails so much, but they didn't own the land they were on. Ethan started researching the parcels that made up the so-called Pinewood Trail System. Most of it was county land, but a significant chunk, about 40 acres, was privately owned. It belonged to an old timber company that had gone bankrupt years ago, and the land had been sitting in limbo ever since. Ethan made some calls, tracked down the current owner through a real estate contact, and found out the parcel was for sale. The price? A steep $320,000, but it was a large, undeveloped tract with no immediate plans for development. To Ethan, it was worth every penny. He didn't tell anyone what he was planning, not his wife, not his buddies at the local diner. He wanted it to be a surprise, a checkmate move that would hit the HOA where it hurt. Ethan had some savings from a good year in his contracting business, and he took out a loan to cover the rest. The deal closed quietly, with no fanfare. One day, the 40 acres were just another piece of wilderness. The next, they belonged to Ethan Caldwell. His first move was to fence off the property. He hired a crew to put up a sturdy chain-link fence along the perimeter, complete with locked gates and more "no trespassing" signs. He didn't stop there. He posted notices at the trailheads, informing hikers that the land was now private property and closed to the public. For good measure, he had a lawyer draft a letter to the HOA, informing them that their Pinewood Trail System was no longer accessible, as the majority of it now ran through his land. The reaction was immediate. Ethan's phone started ringing off the hook. Karen Mitchell left a voicemail that was equal parts outraged and pleading, demanding to know why he'd sabotaged the community's trails. Residents posted on social media, calling him everything from a jerk to a land-grabbing tyrant. A few even showed up at his gate, begging him to reconsider. One woman, clutching a reusable water bottle and wearing a Pinewood Estates baseball cap, practically cried as she explained how much the trails meant to her family. Ethan listened politely but didn't budge. "You fined me for hunting on my own land," he told her. "You didn't care about my rights. Why should I care about your trails?" The HOA tried to fight back. They filed a complaint with the county, claiming Ethan's fence violated some land use regulation. But Ethan had done his homework. The land was zoned for private use, and he was well within his rights to close it off. The county dismissed the complaint. Then the HOA tried to rally the community, organizing a petition to save the trails. It got a few hundred signatures, but it didn't change the fact that Ethan owned the land fair and square. Word spread fast. The local paper picked up the story, running a headline that read, "Local man shuts down popular hiking trails in HOA dispute." The article painted Ethan as a bit of a rogue, but he didn't mind. He'd made his point. The HOA, so used to bullying people with fines and bylaws, had finally met someone who wouldn't back down. Life settled into a new normal. Ethan stopped hunting for a while, mostly because the deer were still skittish from all the foot traffic. But he enjoyed his new land, walking the old trails himself, relishing the quiet. The HOA, meanwhile, scrambled to find new green space for their residents. They talked about building a park, but the costs were astronomical, and their budget was already stretched thin. Some residents started driving to a state park 20 miles away, grumbling about the inconvenience. Ethan didn't gloat, at least, not publicly. But those who knew him could see the glint in his eye when the topic came up. He'd taken a stand, not just for himself but for anyone who'd ever been pushed around by an HOA's overreach. His land, his rules. And for the first time in a long while, the woods were quiet again.